Good afternoon, Senator Cassano and Representative Zawistowski and everybody else. It's good to be here again. Before I give my testimony, I want to say that I have seen the governor's proposed amendment to Senate Bill 874, which is an education bill, as you know, and the first four sections of it are in this bill. I appreciate his responsiveness. He heard a lot from a lot of people, and including me, although I never had a chance to testify on that bill because it was in the Education Committee, which I sit on. So while I appreciate his responsiveness, there are still things that I think need to be said about that section and the rest of this bill. So I'll deliver that, and also that amendment is not actually before this committee today. So with that, here we go. As a whole, House Bill 7192 deals with fostering cooperation among municipalities and school districts, and among all levels of government, actually, the state included, with the aim of creating efficiencies. And I applaud that goal of fostering intergovernmental and regional cooperation. And there's a number of initiatives in this bill that could well lead to good outcomes. For example, considering and making specific recommendations for joint purchasing, for opportunities for the use of e-government solutions, for the streamlining of reporting by various levels of government. We talk about those things all the time, and I think that has a lot of merit. I'd also like to call attention to a part of the bill, Section 21, which would allow two or more municipalities to override their charters or local ordinances for the purpose of jointly performing functions they could otherwise perform separately. The municipalities of the Western Connecticut COG have called for this kind of provision because it would facilitate the voluntary elective sharing of services among municipalities, and I support that. That's a good provision. So I did want to call attention to that. But overall, I'm concerned that the goal of this bill is based on a questionable premise. And that premise seems to be that local governments and school districts are not generally inclined to share services or regionalize functions and must be either forced or incentivized to do so. For example, sections 15 to 20, which require municipalities to consolidate their tax assessment functions at a regional level, and sections 22 to 24, which require 60 towns to consolidate their emergency dispatch operations, would impose penalties for non-compliance. So this suggests that there wouldn't be this sharing, that they wouldn't share the services if existing obstacles could be removed, because there are existing obstacles. This committee, as well as the Education Committee, has heard multiple testimonies that demonstrated the contrary. In the case of emergency dispatch operations, for example, many town executives have cited current binding arbitration rules that have kept them from moving forward on sharing operations. Reforming binding arbitration and taking measures like the one described in Section 21 of the bill would be a far more constructive, easier, and more efficient way of fostering cooperation and sharing than requiring action and imposing penalties for noncompliance. I have some specific remarks. I know the bell rang, but you won't see me again this session.
Go fast.
with your indulgence. Sections 7 to 10 on education, which are duplicated in the other bill as well. These sections would create the Commission on Shared School Services costs to develop a plan for, as at least is still in the unamended bill, redistricting or consolidation of school services in school districts. Lest there be any doubt that the scope of the costs included, at least as a first intent, recommendations for changing the configurations of school districts. The terms redistricting and schools consolidation are used repeatedly, and also noteworthy is the reference on page 22 of Governor Lamont's budget book, which was released in mid-February before any public comment on the bill had been received. The reference was to a school services and redistricting commission. I have several concerns about this education portion of the bill. One is that the focus of COS's work appears to be on cost savings and operational efficiencies with little or no consideration for the quality of education overall, which should be always our primary concern when it comes to education. Second, many school districts would like to share services, and many have. A lot of them are very curious and eager to share services regarding special education, for example. Often, however, they're prevented from doing so because of costs, collective bargaining agreements, or various mandates. There are also cases, and I do want to point one out, there are cases where statewide legislation has passed to encourage sharing of services, but progress hasn't been able to move forward because of the same factors. For example, Governor Lamont has correctly recently highlighted North Carolina's single statewide contract for school software. Well, in 2017, this legislature, passed a bill, House Bill 7276, which became Public Act 17220, that required the state to survey local and regional boards of education on their use of digital school management and reporting software, with a view toward eventually providing a statewide option at no cost to districts. We wanted to make that language go farther, to require the state to issue an RFP, and then to proceed to a contract. But the state's fiscal constraints wouldn't have allowed it. And so we had to get rid of the fiscal note to pass the bill. But that law is still there. The bill's silent. This is a third concern. The bill is silent on the ultimate fate or purpose of the cost plan. And I think the governor has said some things to clear that up, but the bill as it still is, would it require legislative approval to be implemented? Would it require something from the Board of Education, the state board? Would penalties for non-compliance be in there? Is the plan simply an exercise in identifying voluntary opportunities for action by school districts? And I'm wrapping up. One last concern. The uncertainty created by the silence on the purpose of the plan is exacerbated by the length of time, nearly 2 years, COS would have to deliver it. And knowing that the configuration of the school districts could change 2 or 3 years from now does not inspire confidence among prospective residents of Connecticut towns. So, in conclusion, I think the legislature has a role to play in identifying and eliminating barriers to voluntary consolidation and sharing of services. But with a few exceptions, that is not the thrust of this bill. And therefore, I'm having sort of a difficult time seeing what the reason for it actually is. Thank you very much for your thoughtful consideration and your indulgence.
Thanks very much for your testimony. Other questions? Representative Zawistowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Representative, from squeaking out of the tolls debate to come over here and talk about this bill. Since we came in here, we have received some amendments to the education portion of this bill. So some of what you've mentioned is a little better. What I do want to ask you is something that came up in this bill as well. I don't know when you were going through it whether you noticed that ACER is actually required to create a list of mandates every year and submit them to the Appropriations Committee. And since I know that you are the ranking member on Appropriations, I was wondering if you have ever seen this or if there's a way we could possibly get this.
I just can't get away from this stuff everywhere I go, can I?
Of course not.
I have not seen it. I have not seen it. I would very much like to see the last one that was delivered.
Thank you, and I did send an email to you earlier asking if you had seen it. So
you did, but I was,
as
you pointed out, I was next door in the tolls debate, which I still am. I'm actually a figment of your imagination. I'm still over there.
But anyway, thank you for coming in here and taking the time. I don't want to keep you too long if there's other questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Rojas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for being here. Back a couple years ago when I chaired P&D, we went through the whole exercise of consolidating our COGS. And when we were working on that bill, you expressed many of the same concerns that you expressed today, that there were going to be all these negative outcomes from doing what we were doing. Have those things been realized, in your opinion?
I'm trying to remember what they were, because
You were concerned that if we do this, we're going to take tax dollars from your communities and send them to Bridgeport.
Oh, sure.
You're going to lose local control. You were going to do all sorts of things.
Well,
we went through that exercise.
Yeah.
We have your cog here today. Were any of those negative things, have they actually happened?
Have they actually happened? No. No, no one has yet taken our property taxes. However, and let me amend that, because I don't like to use rhetoric these are serious matters.
Sure.
And I think one of the fears here that a lot of people from all over the state have expressed is that everyone pays income taxes, and we understand those go up to the state, and they are used anywhere in the state where the legislature deems they're needed. Same for the sales taxes. The property taxes, in the way that we govern in the state of Connecticut, are generally viewed as being there for local use. And the hesitation and concern remains that there are many pieces of legislation this year that would, in fact, allow or cause property taxes to be used somewhere other than the place where they were raised. And notable among them is the proposal to have the towns pay for part of the normal cost of the teachers' pension contributions that had been paid for by the state. Now, that's not a direct payment of property taxes, but in fact, the revenue that the towns raise from property taxes would be used for that, because they don't have anywhere else they're getting revenue. Another one is the proposal to use the car, to stop the car tax at the municipal level and have that go up to the state level. All of that eventually impinges upon property taxes. That is still a concern of mine. It becomes a concern when there's an obligatory, as some of the municipal provisions that are still in this bill, like the obligatory regionalization of tax assessors. What I am contending is that what would be tremendously useful, because I know the state is, at least I can infer, and you will be able to correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. Part of the purpose of discussing these things in the first place is to see if the towns can't do things that would cause them to need less money from the state, right? And that makes sense. That makes sense to me. But some of those things the towns would have done anyway had they been able to. But if you're going to merge two dispatch operations and one of them pays, the people get more through their union contract than in the other one, that's going to cause a problem. If you have two school districts that really did want to consolidate and one of them has just built a beautiful new school and has lots of debt, does the other one want to take on that debt? Mm-hmm. There are some reasons that these things haven't been able to happen. The last best offer rule on binding arbitration is a great difficulty. And town executives have been offering for a reform of that, have been lobbying for a reform of that for a long time. So what I am really concerned about is to be able to see those things as greater obstacles than just not doing it. That I think there's a lot more sharing than already does go on, that would go on if some of those obstacles were lifted, and that is something that the state, and only the state, can do.
I agree with you on that. There is a lot more that we can do. I don't know that I agree that towns would go do this on their own if simply these obstacles were removed. I think they would do some things, but for the most part, I think folks would maintain the status quo because that's what they're most comfortable with. But that's perhaps, another debate on that day. But,
Well, I agree with you that I can't speak for everybody.
yeah, yep,
And I won't try.
sure. No, thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Representative Dulnicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative, for coming forward today and testifying. I do want to ask you a couple of questions pertaining to some language in the bill and get your gut read on it. And I go to line 207, where alternate sources of revenue for municipal governments, regional councils of governments, and regional education service centers as one of the keys here to what this commission is going to look at. What do you see that leading to? Could we be looking at literally a regional sales tax or a regional property tax or even conceivably a regional income tax charge like, well, say New York City does that?
Well, you could. And you know, the problem is that it's very hard to tell exactly how to interpret all of this language. It's still quite vague. And I can't say for sure what the legislative intent is. But as you agglomerate more responsibilities and more work at the level of, say, a COG, I'm a little less worried about the regional education service centers than I am about the COGs, because the RESCs could conceivably take on a little bit more work than they do without having tax authority or something like that. But at the level of the COG, you know, you need more people, you need more resources, and that has come up quite often in discussions that we've had over the years. And I think the last thing we need is another layer of taxes. We have enough. And it's frankly, Connecticut has been competitive for a long time for metropolitan area, New York metropolitan area folks who have found the taxes in Westchester County just untenable. And that's one reason they came here. Another reason has been for the schools. So, you know, we'd have to look at that very, very carefully.
There's a couple of other troubling, I'll use that word, pieces in here, and I go to line 210 about regional revenue sharing. Any feelings on that?
Would you be able to give me a little, I'm not looking at
No,
the
that's all
bill,
it says
so-
is regional revenue sharing. It says nothing more as one of the focal points of this commission.
Well, if that means that the property taxes from towns come up to one central place and then they are reallocated, well, who's doing that allocating and on whose authority? And that would worry me a great deal, if that's what that means.
And you're right about how vague it is, and literally it is open to any and all interpretation of that commission when they go forward. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, because it doesn't say it's not. Again, if the commission, in the amended language, it says that the commission would not have the, if I remember correctly, because, you know, I saw it this morning when it came out. I don't have it with me, so I can't refer to it. I read it. I believe that it said the commission wouldn't actually have any power to do anything. It would simply recommend. It would collect data and recommend, which is fine. Although I'm not sure we need legislation to be able to collect that data and discuss it.
So do you think it has more of an implication than meets the eye?
Representative, I'd love to say yes, but I can't say.
Okay.
I don't know. You know, we're not that far along in the session yet, but I think we have to be vigilant.
Well, I thank you for your comments, and thank you coming forward and testifying.
Thank you
And
very
Thank
much.
you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lavielle, always good to see you.
And you?
Just briefly, I think most of us are hearing the same thing. you're hearing about, we don't need more taxes. But, you know, I also see things implied so often this year. I keep hearing about, you know, if we're not forced to do it, we're not going to step up and help Connecticut. And I think that's just the wrong message to be giving our people when they give so much. Representative Lavielle, do you have any idea how much in state income tax the people of your town gives to the state of Connecticut every year?
You know, I don't know what the total amount is offhand. However, I can tell you that for every dollar that the people in my town send to the state, the town gets 2 cents back. And in ECS funding, the town gets, and we have something over 4,000 students and something over 18,000 people, the town gets $400,000 in ECS funding.
Well, thank you very much. Puts it in perspective for sure.
Other comments? Just a brief comment on one of the regional aspects of this, or shared services. We've had before us tax proposals, sales tax proposals for municipal sales tax, 0.5%. My town, Manchester, I think was the #1 benefactor from that because we generate more sales tax revenues than anyone.
Really?
But it would have gone to Manchester. Under this proposal, Ashford, which is in the bottom 10 of the generation of tax revenues, would benefit. And poorer towns and some of the rural towns would benefit. So I think there is some of that in that proposal, but I think it's all put in there to kind of fish things out and make us think about how we can work together. And so that's the way I'm looking at it. So I want to thank you for your testimony.